Marion, there's something your husband left. Come to the office, and please, don't bring your daughter-in-law. I remember standing in my kitchen when I got that call, still wearing the black dress I'd worn to the cemetery 2 days before. I hadn't changed it. I kept telling myself I would, and then I'd sit down and forget where I was for an hour, and by the time I remembered again, it was dark outside, and there was nothing left to do but go to bed. 41 years. That's how long Kenneth and I were married. 41 years of Friday night dinners and arguing over the thermostat and falling asleep on the couch during evening news. He was 68 when his heart gave out. The doctor said it was fast. I've held on to that. His accountant's name was Howard Gale. I'd met him maybe 4 or 5 times over the years. A quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who always sent a handwritten card at Christmas. Kenneth trusted him completely. I never had any reason not to. So when Howard called me on a Thursday morning, his voice careful and low, and said those words, "Don't bring your daughter-in-law," I didn't feel alarmed. Not exactly. I felt something I couldn't name yet. Like when the sky turns a strange color before a storm, and your body knows before your mind does. I'll be there tomorrow, I told him. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking out at the backyard. Kenneth had planted a rose bed along the back fence 15 years ago. He was terrible at gardening. Half of them died the first season, but the ones that survived were still there, scraggly and stubborn, blooming every June without anyone asking them to. My daughter-in-law, Pamela, was in the living room. She'd moved in 3 weeks before Kenneth died, or rather, she and my son Garrett had decided she would spend more time at the house to help out while Kenneth was doing his cardiac rehab. At the time, I thought it was kind. I was tired, I was scared, and I was grateful for another person in the house who could drive to the pharmacy or answer the door when I didn't have the energy. But Kenneth died 6 weeks into that arrangement, and somehow Pamela never quite left. I want to be careful how I say this, because for a long time I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was grieving, and grief makes you suspicious, and the kindest thing I could do for myself was assume the best. So let me just describe what was happening, and you can form your own picture. Pamela had strong opinions about the house. That's the most neutral way I can put it. She thought the second bedroom would make a better home office for Garrett, who worked remotely and was spending 3 or 4 nights a week at our house now. My house, I mean. My house. That was something I had to keep reminding myself. She thought the kitchen needed better organization and spent a Saturday reorganizing the cabinets in a way that made no sense to me. But when I moved things back, she sighed and said she worried about me and my ability to manage on my own. She said this in front of Garrett. Garrett nodded. Little things. All little things, if you look at them one at a time. But then my friend Louisa, who I've known since we were both pushing strollers in the park in 1987, stopped by one afternoon while Pamela was at work. We had coffee, and I was telling her about how disoriented I felt, how I kept losing track of what day it was, how I'd been sleeping too much and couldn't seem to get back into any routine. Louisa is a retired nurse. She asked me what I was taking. Just the blood pressure medication I've always taken, I said, and something for sleep. Pamela picked it up for me. Louisa asked to see the bottle. I showed her. She got very quiet in a way I recognized from years of knowing her, that particular quiet that means she's choosing her words. Marion, she said, this is a pretty heavy sedative. Did your doctor prescribe this? I assumed he had. I couldn't actually remember the conversation. I'd been in the office so many times in the weeks after Kenneth died for paperwork and follow-ups and a grief counseling referral that the appointments blurred together. I told Louisa I must have just forgotten. Can I ask, Louisa said carefully, who normally picks up your prescriptions now? I told her Pamela had offered to take over since she drove right past the pharmacy on her way home. Louisa looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I think you should call your doctor's office and ask them to read you the list of everything he's prescribed in the last 2 months. I did. That afternoon, after she left, the nurse put me on hold and came back with a list. It had 4 items. The sleep medication was not one of them. Someone had called that prescription in. It wasn't my doctor. It wasn't me. I sat with that for 3 days before I said anything to anyone, not because I didn't know what it meant. I think I knew immediately. I sat with it because once I said it out loud, everything was going to change, and I was 64 years old and 7 weeks past burying my husband, and I was not sure I had the strength for everything to change. But then I thought about Howard's call. Don't bring your daughter-in-law. Kenneth had known something. Howard's office was in a brick building downtown on the 4th floor, with a view of the parking garage across the street. I'd been there once before, years ago, for something routine. The carpet was the same. The receptionist was different, but she had the same careful smile that people in those offices always have. Warm, but professional. The smile of someone trained to deal with difficult situations, gracefully. Howard came out to meet me himself. He shook my hand and held it for a moment with both of his, the way people do at funerals. And then he took me to his office and closed the door. On his desk, there was a manila envelope. Just sitting there, in the center, my name written on the front in Kenneth's handwriting. I hadn't seen Kenneth's handwriting in 2 months. It hit me harder than I expected. He brought this to me 8 months ago, Howard said. He was very specific. In the event of his death, it was to go to you and only you. He asked me to call you and only you. He asked me to call you privately. Howard paused. He took his glasses off and cleaned them, which I'd noticed was something he did when he was thinking. He was concerned about some things. He didn't tell me everything, but he wanted to make sure this reached you without interference. I picked up the envelope. My hands were steadier than I expected. He had a feeling? I asked. He had a feeling, Howard said quietly. Inside the envelope were 3 things. The first was a letter in Kenneth's handwriting, 4 pages, front and back. I'll tell you what was in it in a moment. The second was a printout of our joint savings account statements going back 14 months. The third was a business card for a woman named Elise Cordero, with private investigator printed underneath her name and in Kenneth's handwriting across the top. Call her. She already knows. I sat in that chair in Howard's office, and I read the letter twice before I trusted myself to speak. Kenneth had noticed things. He'd noticed them before I did, before he got sick, before any of this started. He'd noticed that Garrett had started asking questions about the house. Was it paid off? What was it worth? Had we thought about downsizing? He'd noticed that Pamela had developed a habit of offering to help with anything financial, the insurance paperwork, the Medicare forms, the automatic payments. He'd noticed that Garrett had mentioned twice that some of their friends' parents had moved into lovely communities where they'd have more support. Kenneth was a reserved man. He didn't like confrontation, but he was not naive. In the letter he wrote, I don't know exactly what they're planning. I only know I don't like the shape of it. And I know that if something happens to me before I figure it out, you're going to need help. So I got you some help. He had hired Elise Cordero 6 months before he died. I called her from the parking garage outside Howard's building. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Marion Callister, she said. I was expecting your call. I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a good man. He loved you very much. The way he talked about you when we met, I could tell. I had to take a breath before I could answer. Elise told me that Kenneth had given her broad authorization to investigate Garrett and Pamela's financial activity wherever it intersected with marital assets. What she had found over the course of 6 months was meticulous and damning. Garrett had taken out a personal loan using our lake house as collateral, a lake house Kenneth and I had owned together for 22 years, the place we'd taken the grandchildren every summer, the place I'd assumed was mine as much as anything in the world was mine. The loan was for $94,000. It had been taken out 11 months ago. Garrett was the signatory. I was not. There was also a credit card account in my name that I had no knowledge of. Elise had tracked 4 charges over 8 months that appeared to be personal expenses: a home renovation, a car purchase, airline tickets to Portugal that I certainly had not taken. The card had been opened using my social security number and a mailing address that routed to a P.O. box. The sedative prescription Elise thought was probably more recent. an improvisation, something to keep me disoriented and slow during the weeks after the funeral, when I might otherwise have been looking at accounts and asking questions. I sat in my car in that parking garage for a long time after I hung up. I watched the light change on the concrete walls. A pigeon landed on the hood of the car next to mine and then flew away. Kenneth had tried to protect me from beyond what he could see coming. He couldn't have known exactly how bad it would get, but he'd done what he could with what he sensed, and somehow that knowledge, that even while he was dying he was thinking of ways to take care of me, was the thing that finally broke me open. I cried for 20 minutes in that parking garage. Big, ugly, honest crying, the kind I hadn't let myself do yet, because there had always been someone in the house. When I was done, I wiped my face with a McDonald's napkin I found in the glove compartment, and I drove home, and I was a different person than the one who had driven there. I didn't say anything when I got home. Pamela was making dinner. She'd been making dinner most nights, which I had told myself was generous. I watched her move around my kitchen with a kind of proprietary ease that I'd been interpreting as helpfulness. Now it looked like something else. I smiled and said I wasn't hungry and went to my room and closed the door and called Louisa. Louisa had a nephew who was an attorney in civil litigation. His name was Martin. He'd done elder law before moving into his current practice, and he agreed to meet with me the following week. He knew Elise Cordero by reputation. He told me she was excellent. He also told me that what I was describing was a serious situation and I should not make any visible changes to my behavior until we had a plan. Don't confront them, he said. Don't change anything they can see. Pretend everything is normal. That was the hardest part. Not because I wanted to confront anyone. I've never been a confrontational person, but because I had to sit across the dinner table from my son, from the boy I'd driven to soccer practice for 11 years and nursed through chicken pox and watched graduate and walked with down the aisle at his first wedding that failed and been happy for when he found Pamela because I thought she made him happy. I had to sit across from him and pass the salt and ask about his week and pretend I was still the foggy, disoriented mother he'd come to expect. I was not that mother anymore, but I let him think I was. Over the next 3 weeks, Elise and Martin and I built the case carefully. Martin contacted the bank directly and initiated a fraud investigation regarding the unauthorized credit card. Elise documented the prescription discrepancy and connected it to a pharmacy that confirmed someone had called it in, using my doctor's name without his knowledge. Martin filed a quiet title action on the lake house, which legally froze the loan and Garrett's ability to do anything further with the property. I also, on a quiet Tuesday morning while Pamela was at yoga, changed the locks on the house. I want to pause on that moment because it was smaller than you might imagine. I'd been terrified of it for days. I thought it would feel like a declaration of war, but the locksmith came, a cheerful man who chatted about his grandchildren the whole time. And when he left, I stood in my front hallway with the new key in my hand, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like the house was mine again. There's something I need to explain about my son. I don't think he is a cruel person. I think he is a weak person who made terrible choices, and there is a difference, though it doesn't change the outcome. I think Pamela was the engine of most of this, the planning, the credit card, the prescription. Garrett went along because he was drowning in debt he hadn't told me about, and because Pamela had convinced him that I would be fine, that I was old and confused anyway, that what they were doing was practically just getting ahead of the inevitable. That is what Martin told me later after everything came out, that Garrett had said those words in an interview. She was confused anyway. She wasn't going to notice. He wasn't going to notice. He wasn't wrong that I had been confused. He was catastrophically wrong about why. 3 days after I changed the locks, I was having dinner at Louisa's house when my phone lit up with a call from Garrett, and then another, and then a text from Pamela that said, "Marion, the key isn't working. Are you home?" I let it go to voicemail. Garrett's message was calm at first. Then it wasn't. He said there must be some mistake. There must be something wrong with the lock. Could I call the locksmith? He was worried about me. He just wanted to make sure I was safe. The second message was less calm. The third started with Mom. I really think you need to talk to someone. I'm worried about your mental state. I pressed delete before it finished. I drove home at 9 o'clock. They were both in the driveway. Garrett standing by his car looking pale. Pamela standing at the front door with her arms crossed in a way I will never forget. She had the posture of a woman who had been in charge of a situation and was just now realizing she wasn't. The lock is broken, she said. Not a question, an accusation. It's not broken, I said. I had it changed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've heard in years. Mom, Garrett said, I don't know what someone has told you, but I'd like you both to leave the property, please, I said. You'll be hearing from my attorney. Pamela looked at me the way people look at someone who has done something unexpected and unforgivable, like I had violated the terms of some agreement I'd never agreed to. Garrett looked like he was going to cry. I waited. They got in the car. They left. I went inside. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at Kenneth's rose bed in the dark. I said out loud, to no one, or maybe to him, I've got it handled. What followed was not easy. I want to be honest about that, because stories like this sometimes get told in a way that makes the ending seem inevitable and clean, and it wasn't. There was a period of several months where I was consulting with attorneys and cooperating with investigators and being asked to remember things I'd rather not have had to remember. There were depositions. There was a moment where Garrett's lawyer suggested I was the one who had been mismanaging the finances, which was so absurd that even the mediator in the room looked uncomfortable. The fraud case was strong. The pharmacy confirmed that someone using my doctor's name and my patient ID had called in the prescription. The IP address traced back to the house. Martin wouldn't tell me exactly what evidence tipped the balance on the lake house loan, but the title action held and the loan was eventually ruled invalid. Garrett pled guilty to financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He served 8 months and completed 3 years of probation. Pamela was separately charged and convicted on the prescription fraud. She received 2 years. I did not attend the hearings. I had a good attorney and a good accountant and a good friend who drove me to appointments and made me eat when I forgot to. That was enough. I moved, eventually. Not because I had to. The house was mine, unambiguously mine, and no court was going to change that. But because I wanted to. The house held too many versions of too many things, and I was ready to live somewhere that was only one thing, mine. Now, new. I found a small house 20 minutes away, the kind with a front porch and a yard small enough to manage without help. I planted roses along the back fence the first spring I was there. I am also terrible at gardening. About half of them died. The ones that survived are blooming now, without anyone asking them to. I've thought a lot about what Kenneth knew and how he knew it. He never said anything to me. Not directly. Maybe he didn't want to frighten me. Maybe he wasn't certain enough. Maybe he thought he had more time to figure it out himself before handing it to me. I've made my peace with not knowing the answer to that. What I know is that he saw something coming and he did what he could. He found a good person and gave her a job and wrote me 4 pages of careful, loving, very Kenneth-like instructions. He signed it the way he always signed notes he left on the counter for me. Not love with a comma, but just Kenneth. The way you sign something when your name alone is already everything. I kept that letter. I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand, next to the reading glasses he always meant to replace. I'm 66 now. I sleep well. I take only the medications my doctor prescribes, and I pick them up myself. I have coffee with Louisa on Wednesdays. I have a neighbor named, well, I won't name her, who brings me zucchini from her garden every August, whether I want it or not. And I have started finding ways to actually use it, which feels like a small victory. I think about other women like me sometimes. Women who are grieving and tired and grateful for whatever help appears at the door, because grief makes you open in ways you wouldn't ordinarily be, and not everyone who walks through an open door comes in good faith. I think about how easy it is to seem confused, how confusion can be manufactured, how a person who is actually paying close attention can be made to look like they're not. Pay attention anyway, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Kenneth knew that. He paid attention even from a hospital bed with a heart that was losing the argument. He paid attention on my behalf when I didn't know I needed him to. That's what 41 years looks like if you're lucky. Not just the Friday dinners and the thermostat arguments, the quiet, unglamorous act of someone watching out for you even when you can't see them doing it. I don't take that for granted, not for a single day. I've had a lot of time to think about how this all unfolded, not in a bitter way, or at least not anymore, more like the way you look back at a road you drove in the dark and finally see, in daylight, all the places where you could have gone off the edge. What Garrett and Pamela did had a logic to it. That's the part people don't want to hear, but it's true. They didn't wake up one morning and decide to be cruel. They looked at a grieving woman who was sleeping too much and forgetting things and leaning on whoever was nearest, and they made a calculation. They decided that what they wanted mattered more than what was right, and then they made that calculation again and again, and each time it got a little easier because no one stopped them. That's how it works in my experience. It's not one big terrible choice. It's 100 small ones, each one slightly worse than the last, and by the time you've made enough of them, you've become someone you couldn't have imagined being at the start. Garrett was not a bad child. I raised him with everything I had. But somewhere along the way, he learned to prioritize his own comfort over his own integrity, and I think that happened long before I was widowed, long before Pamela came into the picture. I just didn't see it clearly until the circumstances forced me to. And here is what I know about that. The consequences were not punishment handed down from somewhere outside. They were the direct result of the choices themselves. You forge a signature on a loan document. Eventually, a title attorney finds it. You call in a fraudulent prescription. Eventually, someone checks the records. You treat a grieving woman like she's already gone. Eventually, she wakes up. The things Garrett and Pamela built came apart because things built on deception always carry the seeds of their own unraveling. That's not philosophy. That's just how it works. What I'm more interested in, honestly, is Kenneth's side of it, because he didn't wait to be wronged. He paid attention. He noticed the small things, the questions about the house, the helpfulness that felt slightly off, and instead of dismissing his instincts because they were uncomfortable, he acted on them quietly and carefully and with love. That is a form of intelligence that I think gets undervalued. We talk about being smart like it means solving problems quickly or knowing a lot of facts. But Kenneth's intelligence was the kind that says, something feels wrong here and the people I love may be in danger and I am going to do something about it, even if I never get to see whether it worked. That took courage too, the kind that doesn't look like courage from the outside. He wasn't confronting anyone or raising his voice. He was just doing the quiet, unglamorous work of protecting someone he loved. And that, I think, is what real strength looks like in a life, not the dramatic moments. The sustained, private commitment to doing the right thing when no one is watching and you won't necessarily get credit for it. I think about Louisa, too. The question she asked me about that prescription bottle, asked it gently, carefully, because she was my friend and she was paying attention. That mattered just as much as anything Howard gave me in that envelope. We don't always know when we're being the person who makes the difference in someone else's story. Sometimes we're just having coffee on a Tuesday and asking a simple question. It counts. I'm not the same woman I was before any of this. I don't think I'd want to be. She was a good woman, that version of me, but she was too trusting in the wrong directions and not trusting enough in herself. What I have now is harder to shake. I know what I noticed and when I noticed it. I know I handled it, and I know that Kenneth, wherever he is, would have been satisfied with how it turned out. That's enough for me. It's more than enough.